In a small town nestled at the foot of a towering mountain lived a young man named Ethan. The mountain, known as Peak Horizon, was infamous for its treacherous paths, unpredictable weather, and sheer cliffs. Few dared to attempt the climb, and even fewer succeeded. For as long as Ethan could remember, the mountain had loomed over the town like an unconquerable giant, representing both fear and wonder. Ethan wasn't just another young man. He had a fire within him that wouldn't allow him to back down from challenges. Life had been tough for him. He had lost his parents at a young age and had grown up with his grandparents, who instilled in him values of resilience, hard work, and determination. Still, the pain of losing his family left a gap in his heart that no amount of love or support could completely fill. Ethan knew that if he wanted to honor the memory of his parents, he had to prove to himself that he could overcome the challenges life threw his way. For years, he'd gazed at Peak Horizon, watching adventurers and climbers attempt the dangerous ascent, only to turn back, or worse, disappear into the mist. But for Ethan, climbing that mountain wasn't just about adventure. It was about proving that no challenge was too great for him. It was a metaphor for the challenges of life that he had faced and would continue to face. Peak Horizon became more than just a physical goal. It symbolized the internal mountain of grief, fear, and doubt that Ethan had carried for years. As the 18th anniversary of his parents' passing approached, Ethan made a bold decision. He would climb the mountain, not for glory, not for recognition, but for himself. He wanted to prove that he had the strength to conquer whatever life put in his path. The climb was no small feat, and Ethan knew that preparation was crucial. For months, he trained relentlessly. He ran every morning, strengthening his legs for the steep inclines. He practiced rock climbing to prepare for the cliffs that waited for him near the summit. He studied maps, weather patterns, and stories from past climbers who had attempted the peak. Every evening, he would sit with his grandfather, who had once been a climber himself, to learn about the mountain's many dangers. "Ethan, remember," his grandfather said one night as they sat by the fire, "this mountain will test you in ways you cannot imagine. It's not just your body that needs to be strong, your mind must be unshakable."
Ethan nodded, absorbing every word. "I know, Grandpa. I'm ready for this. I have to be." His grandfather looked at him with pride but also with concern. "The mountain is like life itself. It will throw storms at you, shake you with its winds, and try to push you off course. But if you stay focused, you'll make it. Just remember, no matter how tough it gets, don't lose sight of why you started." Ethan promised himself that no matter what happened, he would reach the summit. The day of the climb finally arrived. Ethan stood at the base of Peak Horizon, the weight of his backpack pressing against his shoulders, but the determination in his heart far outweighed the physical load. He took a deep breath, gazing up at the towering peak shrouded in mist, and began his ascent. The first few hours were relatively easy. The weather was calm, and the path was well marked. Ethan felt strong, his training paying off as he navigated the slopes with ease. He passed the tree line, and the air became thinner, the temperature cooler. Still, he pressed on, his legs moving steadily beneath him, his breath rhythmic and controlled. But as the day wore on, the mountain began to show its true colors. The path became steeper, the rocks jagged and loose. The wind picked up, howling through the narrow passes and sending chills down Ethan's spine. He had expected challenges, but nothing could have prepared him for what came next. As night fell, a thick fog rolled in, obscuring the path. Ethan could barely see a few feet in front of him. He stopped, setting up camp on a small ledge. The wind buffeted his tent, and the temperature plummeted. He wrapped himself tightly in his sleeping bag, trying to stay warm, but sleep was elusive. Doubts began to creep into his mind. What if he couldn't make it? What if the mountain was too much for him? The enormity of the task began to weigh on him. But then he remembered his grandfather's words, "Stay focused. Don't lose sight of why you started." He wasn't climbing for glory or recognition. He was climbing to prove something to himself, to overcome the mountain within. The next day brought even greater challenges. The fog lifted, but the wind intensified, pushing Ethan back with every step. The path became narrow and perilous, with cliffs dropping off into nothingness on either side. His legs ached, his lungs burned, and his fingers were numb from the cold. At one point, he slipped, his foot dislodging a rock that tumbled down the side of the mountain, disappearing into the abyss below. His heart raced, but Max managed to catch himself just in time, clinging tight. But the worst was yet to come. As he neared the final stretch before the summit, a storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and the wind howled with a ferocity Ethan had never experienced before. Rain lashed against him, and the temperature dropped even further. Every step was a battle against the elements, and Ethan felt his strength waning. He found shelter under an overhang and huddled there, shivering and exhausted. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and for the first time, Ethan considered turning back. The mountain seemed determined to break him, to force him to give up. But then, in the midst of the storm, Ethan thought of his parents. He thought of the pain of losing them and the years he had spent carrying that weight. He thought of how far he had come, not just up the mountain, but in life. And he realized that turning back wasn't an option. "This is my climb," he whispered to himself. "I'm not just climbing this mountain. I'm climbing out of my fear, my doubt, my past." With renewed determination, Ethan pushed forward. The storm raged on, but he refused to let it stop him. His hands bled from gripping the rocks, and his legs trembled with exhaustion, but he kept going, step by step. But the worst was yet to come. As he neared the final stretch before the summit, a storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and the wind howled with a ferocity Ethan had never experienced before. Rain lashed against him, and the temperature dropped even further. Every step was a battle against the elements, and Ethan felt his strength waning. He had done it. He had conquered Peak Horizon. But more importantly, he had conquered his own doubts and fears. Ethan sat on a rock, gazing out at the horizon, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The climb had been grueling, more difficult than he had ever imagined, but it had been worth it. He realized that the challenges he had faced on the mountain were no different from the challenges of life. Both would test him, push him to his limits, and try to break him. But if he stayed focused, if he kept moving forward, he could overcome anything. As he began his descent back to the village, Ethan carried with him not just the memory of the climb, but a newfound understanding of what it meant to be brave. Bravery wasn't about never feeling fear, it was about facing it head-on and continuing to move forward, even when the path seemed impossible.